music really require those extra low notes. So I have a 5-string Fender style bass. As a bass player, it took me a long time to learn the essential lesson that when you hold an old Fender bass in your hands, people treat you differently than if you have something that looks very high-tech and new and shiny. And it took me a long time to kind of get over that because I thought, well, those other guys are playing Fenders, I'm different.
You didn't get that note I sent you 20
I did,
years
well,
ago?
you know, and when I first came to Nashville, it was like, you know, you get that look, and after a while you start going, you know, I get that look a lot. And then you have a Fender and you don't get that look, and you go, isn't that interesting?
And from engineers.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And it was like, this is what I'm used to, this is what I want. And it used to be, it was like literally, there was, I remember, gosh, what was his name up at Doc's place? Bernie Vaughn.
Yeah. And
he, you know, just, you know, like wiping the cigarette ashes off the console. You know, I've got the bass set for the last guy. This is good for you. His king was always like, same as last time, right? And I didn't really know what he meant until it was basically saying, I don't want nothing new. We're just, and honestly, for me as a session guy, that's one of the hardest things to learn is that you really have to read every situation as, you know, it's a set of personalities, and you know, sometimes you're the alpha dog, sometimes you're the zeta dog, you know, sometimes you're lucky to, you know, even get a second glance from somebody, so you kind of have to learn how to do that. So for me, I want to have these colors. I want to have an old Fender bass with flat wounds. It's that feel-good thing that a lot of people love, and it does sound great. And then I've got a more modern version of G&L bass with active stuff where you can get a little more of a wide range sound, a little more modern. I always bring a fretless. I have an electric upright that I'm kind of known for that I've had for a long time, and I will usually bring that as well, but the stage is only so big. And then this bass here in the front I've had since I was 13 years old. I moved to Nashville, and the first thing I did, I really needed a fretless bass, so I had a guy yank the frets out of it. And for a bass that has no top end already, it was a really bad move. It just sounded even more, it's like the mud sort of turned to frozen mud. It was like you couldn't do anything about it. But as times changed, it sat under the bed for 20 years, and then I had a guy restore it and put the frets back in. And nowadays, you know, this fat Hofner-y kind of sound, there's a place for that now. So I actually use that bass a lot, and people, you know, who would have probably freaked 33 years ago go, man, it sounds great, man, it's fat.
As someone who does a lot of engineering, it's important for the player to feel good about his stuff, but it needs to intonate well, it needs to be quiet, as in no line hum. The pedals on your kick pedal and your hat pedal can't squeak. Your hardware's got to be tight on the drums. You don't want extraneous ringing, unless you want extraneous ringing, in which case you put a mic on the thing that's ringing. You know, you know, it's it's that total thing. So you want your equipment to be good in every time. You know, bearing in mind that it's going to be moving around a lot, so you have to keep your eye on it, because you can go from one week it's sounding great to 3 weeks later it's like, wait, do I need a new tube from a bass or whatever it is? You have to keep on top of your equipment, especially intonation on string instruments.
I got a great education. It was our third record for Mercury, and I recorded the first two. And these two songwriters, who were probably the happening songwriters in the 60s, wrote us an incredible song. And they came to a rehearsal. And at the rehearsal, they said, Craig, you're good enough to play on the record, but your drums sound like shit. So I'm a kid.
That's two, Craig.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's CH. It's a French spelling.
Just quoting on what they said to me. And so I'm 20 years old, and I'm going, thank God they're not going to replace me with Hal Blaine. I was grateful for that, but then I'm going, why are they ragging on my drums? And they said, don't worry, tomorrow we'll have one of Hal Blaine's sets here for you. So I walk in, and I see the cases, Hal Blaine, set number 8. So right then, that's impressive. And I sit down, and it's a blue Ludwig Sparkle kit, and I'm not exaggerating. I did 4 hits. Boom, whack, boom, boom. And I went, oh. Finally, the light bulb went on. My God, brand new drum heads. And he's got that one tuned that way and that way. And it changed my life. Years later, Hal and I became friends, and I said, it wasn't just your playing, you know, that helped change my life, but you changed my life in a way that was unbelievable. Until, you know, they tore down the Musicians Hall of Fame, it was unbelievable. The first time I walk into the Musicians Hall of Fame, there on a platform is that very drum set from Hal Blaine that changed my life. When I saw the Blue Sparkle Ludwigs, it was an unbelievable feeling. So that turned me on, but then with young musicians, this is the hard part. You don't have money to buy guitar strings or new bass strings. You don't have money to try to change drum heads. On a course of a regular album, when in LA, we'd be working on an album, and let's say it would take about 6 weeks to do a record, 5 weeks, I would probably rehead at least 3 times during the course of that album. I don't break heads, but pretty soon the bottom is gone from the toms. The crack is gone from the snare drum. And that is hard for young musicians, you know, and how can I afford this? And a drummer will go in and say to an engineer, I want to sound like John Bonham. Meanwhile, the heads are completely shot. There's no tone whatsoever. So, you know, as a young musician, it's tough. You know, and if you are going to go in and make some demos, maybe as a band, you could pool some money, and maybe your fellow mates in your band would realize, you know, maybe we should buy this guy and chip in and buy him some heads so we can try to get a good drum sound. This is my old drum set from 1978. Eye of the Tiger, Betty Davis Eyes, Only Lonely, The Motels, tons of gold and platinum records. And now I use it for my live set. I do have a drum set that is my recording set and has been since '87. But I think that you have to learn about tuning and just like Fred said, just when people come in, they've got to be ready.
You know what? Understand the job description in choosing what to play, what to bring. Understand what it is that you're there for, whether it's a live gig, whether it's a studio gig. And that can pretty much dictate what it is that you need to bring.
Yeah, and there's a confidence that you acquire over time, and you just have to learn through mistakes, and everybody makes them. And you know, when you get to that point, you know, like for example, when I stopped asking producers and artists whether they thought I should use round wound or flat wound strings on this particular song, and discovered that they really didn't care at all, and that I really just needed to make my own determination as to what I thought was correct based on what you hear. And this is, I think we should definitely talk about this a little bit. So much of it is, you know, when you go in and you cut a track, like we're going to sort of demonstrate for you later, you don't know where it's going to go. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what it's going to sound like in the end. But when you're there, your job is to fit not only musically, but sonically in with what else is going on. Nowadays, you know, a lot of times you'll have double electric guitars on a tracking session. And those two guys have got to learn how to deal with one another, whether it's capo positions, whether it's the type of amp they're using, whether one guy's playing a Fender, one guy's playing a Gibson. It's about finding your space without stepping or getting in the way of other things. And I think, you know, and so it's a very reactive thing, and you know, it's also very personal because, you know, this is where you can be totally dependent on the engineer, who can really hang you out to dry if the mix is not there in your headphones. And of course nowadays, you know, when I first started doing sessions, they'd gotten past the 3-track, but it was still like the headphone boxes had left and right band, a vocal, and a click, and that was pretty deluxe to actually have the vocal and a click track on their own thing. But
yeah, when I get out of bed in the morning, the first thing I want to do in the studio is go do a headphone mix. I think that the art of doing a good 2 mix in the cans is lost. That's my point. Is it's really hard to do because now you've got an 8-channel mix and everybody wants to hear themselves, and it's too often. And some would say that's maybe some of the problems with some of the records that are being made that don't have that dynamic, they don't have that air, because everybody's got themselves cranked up listening to what they're doing, and you can forget that it's really you gotta back up. You know, you have to
focus in on every little bit. Oh, should I add a little more 1K or whatever? But you've got to be able to like almost constantly move your focus from very close to far away and see what's going on with the big picture, and never forgetting what's going on with the song.
Yes.
And that's the Nashville thing. That's
And
what
it's
makes.
not just Nashville.
Well, but I mean, it's anywhere. I mean, as a, you know, but I mean,
Read the words, read the words.
Hi,
Yeah,
Jim.
Kenny Malone had a great comment one time. We were doing a session, and in fact, Vince Gill told the story the other night at the Willie dinner. He said, "Have you got a copy of the lyric?" And I said, "Sure." And he says, "Yeah, I want to know what I'm playing. Want to know what I'm playing my drums for."
And that I asked for a
Or what
lyric.
I'm playing about.
Yeah,
He would
what
say
I'm
stuff
playing
like
about. That's it.
I ask for a lyric sheet on every single session. I mean, it's what mood do they want me to help create, and that's very important. It's all about the song, exactly.
Well, the drums are kind of important.
Well, you know, yes, there.
No,
But I've got no.
I think you're not. I think you're absolutely on the mark, David. About I think there's probably 8 or 10 guys in town who can do a decent 2 mix in your phones in less than 5 minutes.
Yeah, and it just
the
makes
younger
such
guys
a
cannot
difference.
do it. All they're doing is busting to an 8-trap, and it's like, come on, man, work a little bit harder than that. You know, we're going to get 5 songs on this session anyway, but do take 5 minutes and get the cans right.
And it puts the musician in the position of, in addition to everything else, being your own mixer. And I mean, sure, everybody likes to go, hey, can I get a little more vocal? Can I get a little less this? But in terms of, everybody hearing the same thing and getting back to that feeling like that the old records made in Studio B where there were no headphones and everybody was listening to the space and you had to play lightly so you could hear what the guy was doing. And I kind of have a theory that some of those early rock and roll records were the product of guys not being able to hear each other. And you'd have one guy playing a straight 8s rhythm and another guy playing a shuffle on the other side of the room, and it sort of created that, some of those old Little Richard records and stuff. Some of that is the sound of people who can't hear each other, but I think,
I call it the rub.
You know what I mean?
Great records have a rub.
Exactly, it's the human thing, and I think that's part of what's missing in music today is those things. You can perfect the soul out of something, and that's something we fight almost every day. And so when an engineer delivers you a mix, or it sounds like a record in your head, you get outside of yourself, and it becomes a much bigger thing. And so I do think it's a lost art, but there's still, every now and then, somebody will nail it, and you kind of appreciate that. And maybe as you go up the ladder and you become a producer, you call that guy and go, hey, I want you to engineer this, because I want to have that feeling when I make this record. Larry, do you have a question?
Yeah, I originally no, but you guys got me thinking about some special.
Well, that's the idea.
Yeah, really. So I want to jump on in. By the way, I echo what you said. I think Chet Atkins reportedly once said the song is the song.
Yeah.
So I've always appreciated that. But anyway, I'm not a drummer. I'm a bassist and a guitarist. But with the advent now and the technology they have, and they're using a lot of no-one vocalists, the pitch control and stuff like that. In other words, and I know this will put a lot more pressure on a typical engineer in any kind of session, particularly master. But I just wonder if you guys see that they coming in the not too distant future where they're going to start using technology to the fault. And by that I mean
Yeah, they're already having that. I have found on software.
Honestly, I'm hoping that we're on the downside curve of that. It's now a monkey can make a perfect record. We know that.
Yeah, you see what I'm saying.
But absolutely. I think that, it kind of the great equalizer is, does this music mean anything to anybody? And I think that the perfect records, they kind of go, yeah, it's
Well, you don't want
nice.
to remove the human element, even for the sake of expediency. And I know a lot of it's financial in nature. We can understand that right now more than ever. But yeah, I hope we never get to the point where you take the human element out of it.
Well,
I believe it's cyclical. If you really look back on things, it's all a cycle.
because Craig was doing stuff in the heyday of the drum machine. You want to talk about that for a second? 'Cause that's pretty interesting.
And also probably a good segue into click tracks. There were no click tracks in the 60s and 70s, and perhaps the only place that click tracks appeared were for movie work, when things had to be synced to a picture. And that was literally a click track. Click, 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 click. Very difficult to play to, because if you think about it, you're on with the click track if you don't hear it. If you start hearing that, you're either rushing or dragging. So it wasn't really until the 80s, I think, that in LA anyway, that's the first time with click tracks. And then, you know, like Dave was talking about, drum machines came in. And at the very first NAMM show, where all of a sudden the drum machine appeared, drummers were walking through the halls cursing this box. And I said, well, cursing and saying that this is bad for drummers, it's not going to make that machine go away. So Craig, you better learn how to program. And I did. And so for a while, keyboard players ruled the world. Producers were having a keyboard player just syncing up everything and program. And then finally it got around that there's actually a drummer who knows how to program. And so for a long, I mean, I was one of the few guys that worked through that technological revolution and worked with Yes and Boy George and did tons of big records as a programmer. Drum machines were such that the cymbals sucked. And so after laying programming, I would do live cymbals or live hat to kind of disguise it. And so maybe that's a segue. I think you have to embrace technology. You can't be, I think if you don't, you're going to get old. I think, but it's the proper, to me anyway, it's the proper application of tools. If the technology becomes more important than the art, then we're in trouble. As long as the art is the bottom line, there'd be tracks when, you know, they hired me for a drummer and I'm hearing something and I would go, man, this I think should be drum machine. You want this hypnotic thing? Well, and trust me, and they did, and I would program it, and just vice versa. In that era, Craig, this should be a machine, and I'm going, let me play. You know, so it's proper application of tools, I think.
Yeah, today, I got to say, I have clients who want things tuned up fine. I have the software to do it, I know how to use it, and I'm quick with it. They have polyphonic stereo tuning software now that if you sit and look at what it will do as a creative tool. I mean, any idiot can do the T-Pain vocal sound, but it's actually kind of funny sounding now to me now. I kind of didn't like it when Cher did it a few years ago, but because it was not obvious. Now it's obvious, so okay, this is something they're glitching with. But think about this for a second. I'm working on a demo. I want a clarinet sound to do a solo. This is just what I did the other day, just because it's kind of a Dixieland thing. So I sang the part I wanted the clarinet to play, run through the no-down software, export it as a MIDI file, pull it back into the session, pull up a clarinet sample, and fire it off, and there I got a clarinet. So I didn't pay for a clarinet player, sorry. But I got the clarinet.
They're waiting for you outside.
And it's not like I'm going to do, I know, it's not like I'm going to do 16 parts of clarinet and that it's going to sound exactly like clarinet. That's not the point. So you want to put that in the person's head, because I'm not making a demo for the public. I'm making a demo for 3 or 4 people who need to hear it and say, oh, I get it, you know. So it can work across purposes for sure. And there's people, I think one of the things that that you see a lot now, and because my 15-year-old daughter, I listen to a lot of pop radio, because she's just learning how to drive, and you should all stay at home on Tuesdays and Thursdays. However, I listen to a lot of pop music, and it's very obvious which records have live people in the room playing, and what records were born in a control room, you know, working with clicks and all that stuff. I didn't play with a click track until I moved here in '83. And in fact, it was '84. And I'll tell you what, it was Eddie Bayers. We were over at Audio Media doing these satellite records with Whirler, right? And he didn't use a click track, but he had a stopwatch on his little Casio, and he'd go in and he'd pop, pop, you know, and pop, pop, and relap the thing. And if it was like 0.19 seconds, well then if a minute later it was still 0.19 seconds, he knew he was.
That's so
cool.
LA,
yeah,
constantly.
The analog thing, so he was hitting the stopwatch on the beat, down, down, reset, and down, down.
That's right. I've never heard it done before, they said.
But well, that's how the time delays.
Yeah.
And
You know, by using a stopwatch, a digital stopwatch. So if you want it to lay back, you want the track to lay back, and you rush the delay a bit. If you want it the other way around, you speed it up.
And if there's younger musicians here who haven't had experience playing with a click track, I don't call my click track. He's Raul, my Cuban percussionist. And Raul,
Really good sense of time.
But like all Cubans are percussionists? Well,
and Raul plays grooves, just like I was at a studio and across the way, and a friend of mine said, Craig, this young drummer can't play with a click. What's wrong? Come and tell me what's wrong. It was literally click, click, click. No, I don't care who you are. That is incredibly difficult to play to. And like I said, if you're really on with it, it disappears. To me, it's all about, for young drummers, you can get an Alesis and program. So it's all about subdividing. So you have a cowbell doing this, and you have shakers doing this. You got an offbeat tambourine going, and you get a groove playing. So there's actual times when Raul has been so darn cool, he's actually made it to the record. I'll say to the producer, turn on Raul, man, he's rocking. So if you're a young musician, that would be my advice, is just program cool grooves that are fun to play to.
I'll tell you something else if you're young, that's the greatest tool. If you got a Mac, get GarageBand and just practice with the damn drummers in there. It's good. All the tempos, all the grooves, even the version 1 has a lot of cool stuff to practice to. Then you can like program changes, because I used to record, first started to play studios, I used to record sections of like Donna Lee, Charlie Parker's song, and I'd do the rhythm guitar part, and then I'd make a loop for it on my Echoplex, and then play with it for 25 minutes. You know, at real slow speed, but you know, like I said, it was geared for, and I had lots of free time because my girlfriend broke up with me. That's another story.